All right, how we doing, humans? I'm gonna kind of do a video, maybe a series. We'll see how that goes. But I learned a lot over one of my lessons. I've got a peer group that I work with a men's group, and we did a really cool talk this morning that pertains a lot about, especially HEW Fit, and then our own journeys overall in terms of like our own fitness journeys. So it's called the drift, or for a lot of people, it's just called the funk. So we go through these like funks in life. They call it the drift because you go through like a high progress point in your life, and then you kind of drift away from lacking progress, getting a little bit more stagnant, and that kind of thing. So basically, what happens is we all come up on these highs. We get super motivated, and we make tons and tons of progress. All right, and progress is amazing. But then what happens is that something occurs. There's typically a trigger or an event or something that happens that's going to force an emotional reaction out of us, and then a behavior that stems from it. And we go into this drift or this funk, okay? So we want to talk about like, all right, we have all this momentum, we're doing good, we have all this progress. Something happens, and then we're going to go through a dip, and then that dip can be an undetermined amount of time. So the example that was used in our meeting today was that the guy's father was a real estate developer, and he used to do all of this construction leading up until 2007, 2008, where the the market crash happened. He virtually lost everything in his life, from his life savings to his company to everything, when the market crash hit, and he went into a drift, or he went into a funk. And now this is 14 years later, he's still in the funk, meaning that now he just drives trucks, and he still has this bitterness to like that experience in his life because it was very traumatic to him. So we go through these things at different phases in our life and different areas of our life. So this can be a relationship funk where like you guys just aren't feeling it with your spouse or whatever it is. It could be a funk at the gym. Easy one for us to kind of like relate to is that like you're seeing all this progress, everything's great, yada, yada, yada. And then boom, you get injured, or boom, you get sick. And you have this emotional response to it, which if we don't recognize it, then it can a lot of times be negative. And then the behavior changes. So if I go to the gym every single day, and then I get injured, or I get sick, or I get, whatever it might be, and then boom, I have this emotional response of like anger and frustration of like, now, it just took all of the wind out of my sails. My behaviors will start to change, and I'm going to go through this drift or this funk. Okay. The first step in trying to basically going through, they call it an anti-drift formula or anti-funk formula, is that you're able to recognize a trigger or an emotional response. And sometimes that's easier to do than others. Sometimes, like if it's a market crash and you lose your business, that's an easy trigger, easy traumatic thing that you went through or event for you guys to recognize it. And then depending on how traumatic it is, how quickly you guys can kind of respond to that. If it's something like you trying to be more thoughtful in your relationship, or you trying to, like love on your spouse a little bit more, and they tell you that they don't believe that you're doing all of these things authentically, that this is just like some phase that you're going through, then that's going to be a trigger. And then how you emotionally react to that's going to obviously change the behavior, or hopefully keep the behavior the same. If you can recognize the trigger, you can control the emotional reaction. If you can control the emotional reaction, then you can either stay the course on the behavior or change the behavior for the good. Okay, so in kind of recapping, you're going to have progress, you're going to be highly motivated, and then there's going to be an event that's a trigger that's going to force you to reflect on whether or not you can handle your emotional reaction, and then if you can handle the behaviors afterwards. All right, the goal, and again, this takes time, one, based off the individual, and two, based off the how drastic the event is or the trigger is to have different ways that you handle it so that you can kind of disconnect and pull away from some of the emotional. What I mean by that is the 5 things that he gave in terms of like how he handles it. When he gets triggered and there's an emotional reaction, he automatically either goes into prayer or into meditation. So he uses some self-reflection and then speaking to God as something that he can help to conquer his emotions so that his behaviors don't change if they were in the right direction. Exercise is a really good thing. A lot of times, like we talk gym talk, so an injury, I can't go exercise right away. But a lot of times if it's an emotional thing with your spouse or with business or with work and something that happened at work, then you can go exercise to kind of get it out. Calling a friend is a big one. Just making sure that you have somebody that you can talk to and just say, hey man, like I'm in a funk, I don't get it, you know, such and such, this is what happened, it triggered me and I can't pass it. And then lastly is journaling is something that he does. So everybody has their own formula in essence, meaning that we all deal with emotional triggers and emotional responses and behavioral responses differently, but have us having the self-awareness to make sure that we recognize it so that we're, productive and we're proactive about it rather than being in this reactive and woe is me, I'm the victim, yada, 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 then you won't get out of the funk as quickly. All right, so based off the size of the trigger or the size of the, how, whatever that event is, he says a good goal is for you to hold on to it for less than a day and at most 2 to 3 days. So if you do get injured, yes, it's gonna be hard for you to exercise for 2 days, but on day 3, we can do something to modify and to maintain the behavior. So I tie this into HEW a lot. Again, it deals with a lot of stuff outside of the gym, but the first 2 weeks we go awesome, something happens at work, we go through a trigger, we have alcohol, it turns into pizza and garlic knots, and then that decision throws us off the rails emotionally, and we emotionally disconnect from HEW. And now the last 2 weeks, the last 10 days, whatever it might be, you're checked out. And you're back in a funk that you were prior, or you're in this new funk that you don't really understand what happened. And typically there's a trigger and then the emotional response, and then it changes your behavior, especially if you're on a progress, then it's gonna change your behavior. There is a flip side to where you could be in a funk, something triggers you, it motivates you, and then you change habits for the right direction or in the right direction. Most times what we see is where you guys are gonna be in a good, everything's going well, and then you get slapped in the face, and then the emotional reaction and the behaviors change, and then you go into that funk, okay? So as much as I can tie it into HEW, I want you guys to go through your last 2 weeks super strong. Stay motivated. This is going to be your hardest weekend just because for whatever reason, weekend 3, everybody falls out. You're going to get triggered, and it's how you respond to the triggers. And triggers don't necessarily have to be negative at the front line, meaning it could just be a friend that they need you to go out and do happy hour or whatever it is. So that was your trigger. Your response is, I need to help my friend. And now the behavior leads into, going into a funk. So it's not always going to be obvious. So the very first thing that you guys have to look at is, can I identify the trigger and the emotional response that I had in terms of how I handled it, whether that was somebody needing you or something's happening to you. The trigger might not necessarily be one way or the other. So, but again, you're going to have these rounds of motivation, and then you're going to go into this funk. And then the faster that you can get out of that funk and get back to your motivation, the better. So recognizing that trigger and that emotional response is going to be the strongest thing that you guys can do. So hope that helps you at any point, whether this is in HEW fitness, your faith, your relationship, your business, whatever it might be. But I hope that helps. It's a really, really cool thing that we all go through, and some of us get stuck in funks for a long period of time, and then we just need to get out of them, and we need to kind of take ownership for, even if we don't remember why we're in the funk, we need to just take ownership for ourselves and make sure we get ourselves out of the funk. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and this touched you and hopefully helped you in some way, shape, or form, and we will see you in the gym. We love you.